and welcome to the April 2024 BigFix Briefing Room. My name is Michelle McGough.
And I'm Joe Saylor.
And this month, we're going to cover a few things. Joe, why don't you take us to the agenda? Hey, thanks. So we're going to talk about some ransomware that we warned you about last month. Spoiler alert on Microsoft patchwork this month, there's a lot of SQL. We've got vulnerabilities of the month. There's a denial of service that Joe's going to break down for you. It seems to have evolved. We'll touch on SysACEV, and then we've got some new features for you in BigFix 11.02. Joe, do you want to take it away with the ransomware?
Yeah, so last month there was a real theme to all of the kind of nasty vulnerabilities. Basically, every virtual hypervisor had like something really kind of crazy going on with it. There was a lot of like data exfiltration stuff happening. There was ways for attackers to break out of local VM and do stuff on the hypervisor. And it really looked like that was going to trigger an arms race. Anytime you have exploits like that have like really juicy targets, you can bet that all of these attack groups, all of these threat groups will go after those exploits pretty much immediately. And it creates a race between patching and how fast they can actually exploit these CVEs. And it just so happened that there's been like multiple companies that got hit with very, very effective ransomware attacks that look an awful lot like those CVEs were exploited. So Panera Bread and Omni Hotels both suffered really big outages. Omni Hotels specifically had users that just couldn't get into their hotel rooms, like even their card system was taken down. So it really disrupted their operations, and it was all perfectly foreseeable. When you have attack vectors like this and really big, well-funded threat groups that can go after them, they're going to be exploited. So make sure you have your ESXi environments updated. All of this could have been avoided with patches, in all of these instances.
Yeah, actually, if your ESXi environment hasn't been updated, why don't you just pause this video and go do that, and we'll be here when you get back. All right.
Yeah, for sure. Updating that is more important than listening to me. You should do that right now.
You can still listen to Joe. All right. So I saw your notes about this month's Microsoft CVEs and Fixlets, and I had to highlight what you put about SQL. So why don't you give us a summary and then break down what's going on with SQL?
Yeah, so anybody who's been paying attention to Microsoft patches for any amount of time will notice that 147 CVEs is a super high number for updates for this month. Generally, we might see like 60 or 70 CVEs in a month, and this number just eclipses all of those, and it's all just concentrated in the SQL products. Last month, there was one or two SQL CVEs, and it was really just an attack vector where if you were tricked into connecting to a malicious database, then the malicious database could do whatever they wanted with your ODBC driver. And that was about it. There was just a couple. And now it seems like that has kind of spread and been found in basically every SQL product in the Microsoft portfolio. For whatever reason, Microsoft has decided to report these all individually. And so even though it's a very similar CVE and the same attack vector and the same practically everything, there are like 50 some odd CVEs listed for this one vulnerability. And so it looks like the apocalypse. This looks like it's the end of the world, and SQL has all of the vulnerabilities you've ever seen. But the reality is it's just one. There's really just one thing. Yeah. And it's not even a particularly nasty one. It does require a user to get tricked. So someone has to click on a malicious link or a malicious SQL file, like a .SQL file, would probably allow someone to make use of this. So it's, the same attack vector as practically everything else. Like someone's got to get phished for these to be useful.
Yeah, and I think the reason they create all of those separate, separate fixlets, separate vulnerabilities, I sincerely think it's because of reporting across all the different platforms and versions.
Yeah,
Although
one for
so
each.
many does make it more complicated at the same time. So, no matter what you do, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, I guess, or 44, as it were. in this
Yeah,
case.
anybody that does any programming knows that cross products are kind of a thing to deal with.
Yeah.
Things multiply out of control real quick.
Well, that was definitely the Microsoft vulnerability of the month or vulnerabilities. But I noticed each month when we do this, you curate vulnerabilities and exploits. And I know why you were doing it, but I don't think we ever really touched on why you select the things that you do. Some of them are maybe a little obvious because they're urgent or really high risk. So, of course, you want our BigFix customers to know about them. But other times, I've noticed you always catch the ones where the risk score isn't aligned with the severity. And I think that's really important to bring these up because if that risk score is too low, it would be very easy for a customer to ignore it or deprioritize it until some other things with a higher score were done first and vice versa. And we don't want customers wasting their time. And we don't want you wasting your time on something that isn't really a priority. And we do want you to focus on the actual priorities. So that's the reason for vulnerability of the month. Let's go into that first one. I think it's SharePoint.
Yeah, so SharePoint, some security researchers have found some methods to hide the way that data is accessed in SharePoint. And this is, I think it's a little bit overblown in exactly how bad this vulnerability is or this technique is. But it makes for a really interesting lesson. So essentially in SharePoint, whenever you go to report on data that has been downloaded, you would typically want to look at the download event. There's an event in SharePoint that gets logged anytime a user downloads a file. And by download, that means explicitly like right click, download to desktop, right? Not necessarily viewing it inside of SharePoint. And so, a lot of people, I think, would use that as their first indication that data is being exfiltrated out of your network. Like you would look at just the explicit download events. And this hides that. So this allows users to, with just a, very like minor amounts of workaround to download files with just access events. Um, and so that's the whole vulnerability, right? We're just hiding files that have been downloaded. The lesson here is that, for any serious security data reporting, really you should probably be treating data accessed events as exfiltration events.
Yes.
So in SharePoint, especially documents, very easily you can just access a Word document and copy the whole contents into another Word document without triggering a download event. And so like this should be at least a wake up call for not just SharePoint, but for like all other products. If you're doing any security logging, don't necessarily rely on explicit download events, right? Take a bigger picture and look at things more like data accessed or anything of that nature and treat any of those as exfiltration.
Yeah, I noticed researchers, I actually put that in the action section for this. Researchers were recommending extending the audit and monitoring scope to include unusual file access and sync activities, and then to be sure to go back and review those. So yeah, I think this is a great takeaway, Joe. But I agree with you. The moderate severity is probably, I don't know. I think that's probably accurate.
Yeah, and there's not really any fix for this right now,
Correct.
right? Like the techniques that are being used are they're just like you accessed the file in SharePoint, and so there isn't really, I don't think, going to be any code change to disable that. Aside from just like removing the data access event altogether, and maybe just treating everything as a download as you probably should.
Agree. Let's move on to the next one. Yeah, this IoT attack chain. I thought this was really interesting because it's a couple of vulnerabilities that are kind of moderate to starting to get severe, but when you add them together, it's a whole different story.
Yeah, so the concept of the attack chain is really important when you're considering threat actors because there's all sorts of individual pieces that taken on their own aren't particularly threatening. So, for instance, in Microsoft Defender for IoT, there is this month a remote code execution exploit that, that sounds bad. It allows an attacker to kind of run whatever they want if they have access to the Microsoft Defender for IoT server. But in order for this to work, they have to already have admin rights on the server, right? So they have to have already compromised, some user's account. They have to have defeated your multi-factor authentication. They probably had to go stalk somebody on LinkedIn for a couple of months and then trick your help desk. Like there's all sorts of things that prerequisites to take advantage of this that make it not particularly threatening, right? If somebody has compromised, if an attacker has compromised an admin account, this is the least of your worries. there's so many other things they could already do. So this one is, it would be a good pivot point. So, they would be able to do like run some application that could move to another server, perhaps. But it as a primary point of ingress for an attacker, not that threatening. It's really just not that threatening. However, in the same day on the same application, there was another CVE just sneaky in on the side, only rated a 7.2, that does not require anybody to make a mistake. It doesn't require user interaction, doesn't require someone to have a compromised account, and it will provide admin rights on the server. It will allow an attacker who can make use of this CVE to elevate privileges up to admin, and then they can use the first CVE to do whatever they want. And so suddenly you go from like two that don't seem to be very threatening on their own to an attack chain, a ready-made attack chain that will burn your entire data center down. So taking these things together and like noting when there are these synergies inside attack chains, will really like help understand what threat actors are going to target.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And apologies for laughing. It may have been inappropriate, but sometimes your deadpan humor gets me. If we had a Joe Saylor risk rating system, what would you rate this attack chain?
Yeah, I mean, this is over a 9 for me, of course,
Yeah.
because it removes a lot of the barriers to entry for these attacks, and it's kind of it's a ready-made chain. Like inside one application, have elevation of privileges and remote code execution without authentication. And so that's just like it's not quite a trifecta, but it's everything an attacker needs all in one spot.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought this one up. This one would have slipped past me, honestly. So let's move on to the next one. I think there's more elevation of privileges. Yeah, this one with Kubernetes.
Yeah, so this kind of continues the trend of virtual machines and hypervisors being vulnerable in the last month or so. It doesn't require authentication. The code that exists for this is in like kind of proof of concept mode, so there's no button out there that allows an attacker to just take over everything. So it's not at that level of severity yet. The proof of concept code does not like work everywhere. It requires lots of customization and lots of like knowledge of the target environment. So it's like, I think the 9 base score is about right for this one. There's potential for it to be super bad. This allows an attacker to take over confidential guests, theoretically with no privileges, from the untrusted domain inside your Kubernetes instance. So this one definitely needs to be taken care of. It doesn't have a like really direct update. You kind of have to go in and run azcomcom on your own. So just if you have Kubernetes, make sure you're up to date and have the latest image versions.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. That's a good one. And then I was really excited about this one because denial of service, I think most people understand that concept, but it really has evolved quite a bit, even just in, it looks like less than a year. So I'm curious how you want to break this down for folks who are seeing this for the first time.
Yeah, we've really evolved quickly in the denial of service space. And this is the classic denial of service that has existed since forever, since the dawn of time here. You can kind of see what our original technology was for this. The HTTP1 attack it's sequential in nature, right? A server would not respond to a given client more than once. Like the client would have to send a handshake to the server would have to respond, client could send another handshake and repeat, right? So there was a natural gate on how much a single endpoint could hit a server.
So if you wanted to, so we're in the image on the left. If you
Yeah.
wanted to, flood, you would need multiple clients.
And not just multiple, like this was, the days when you would need like tens or hundreds of thousands
An
of
army.
points. Yeah,
Yeah.
just many,
Right.
many, many. You would need a huge botnet. And that's not to say it didn't happen, but it required many resources.
So
Uh,
then in 2015, that shifted.
yeah, so when HTTP 2 came out, then there was a little bit of an increase in the amount of attacks you could send from a single endpoint. The graph here sort of indicates it, hopefully clearly enough. But basically, there was a limit, a hard limit built into the server, but it would respond to any number of messages from one client up to that limit. So the default for most implementations was 100. So that means that we had about 100 more attacks that could come from a single system, reducing the number of endpoints in your botnet that it would take to take down a server, right? Before it would be overwhelmed with requests. And then, late last year, October sometime, the rapid reset attack came out. This one was even scarier. It allowed clients to leverage the reset frame in HTTP2 to not wait for a server to respond before it could send another 100 or 1,000 pings out to that box.
And that
So
number, they can just configure that to whatever they want.
yeah, and it's completely unlimited. The amount of traffic we saw just across the internet around that time was up by about a factor of 1,000. So we could, we're making guesses here on exactly how effective this was, but it sure looked like a single endpoint could send out about 1,000 times more traffic than in the standard, like the original, the OG HTTP2 attack.
Okay.
So
And
now, in HTTP1, we had, like one system was worth one attack. In HTTP2, one system was worth 100. And then in HTTP2 rapid reset, one system was worth, that would be 100,000 of the HTTP1 boxes. So we're really reducing the number of boxes in your botnet by just orders of magnitude. And now enter the dystopian future that we're living in. As of April 4th, just a few days ago, the HTTP2 continuation attack was developed and reported on by security researchers. This essentially is a single packet attack against vulnerable servers that uses the continuation frame, which is basically allows TCP requests to split single messages into multiple messages. So if a website is 10 megabytes in size, this is what lets us transfer it in like really small, like 1 kilobyte chunks. That's all it is. So it's necessary, useful technology, but in many implementations, in the default implementation of HTTP2, there's no limit to the number of continuation frames a client can send. So we can send one packet that has no end, no end of continuation frames, just an infinite number, and the server will just try and process an infinite number of frames.
yeah.
And so the failure mechanism is really mundane. Like it's not exciting. It's just you run out of memory or you run out of CPU on your server. And that can happen with just a single endpoint.
Do web application firewalls prevent this? Or is this really all about solving for that misconfiguration of HTTP?
Yeah, it's definitely all about the configuration. This is still early days, so this was just published a few days ago. I'm certain that there will be quite a few more CVEs coming out for specific products. There's a lot of foundational stuff that is affected by this. For instance, Apache has been confirmed to be vulnerable. The Go programming language has this kind of built into it. Node.js as well has been confirmed to be vulnerable. And these are all like, base technologies for many applications. So I'm sure we will see lots of configuration changes coming for servers in the near future.
Yeah, it sounds like it. All right. Well, I think that concludes our vulnerabilities of the month and breakdown. You're going to break down some Linux. I think we just had one that you wanted to cover this month.
Yeah, not a lot of activity in the Linux kernel space this month. This one is kind of particularly interesting just because it has a fairly high base score, and it is a little more serious a vulnerability than I'm used to seeing in the Linux space. It's specifically in GPU operations, so this stuff probably doesn't affect any of your servers, right? So not, anything without a user interface that isn't running graphics calculations or anything like that, um, not really going to be affected by this. But it is a use after free exploitation in that can happen after like a GPU operation takes place. I guess quick note on that: use after free for anybody not in the Linux security space is really just a way to say local code execution. So this requires an attacker to access memory and kind of swap in whatever they want to run.
I was going to ask you that because I don't think I've seen that one before.
Yeah, it's really sneaky. Remote code execution is a super clear phrase, but use after free is not as clear as what it is, as clear as that. We could probably have a whole slide on explaining the technicalities of it, but maybe next time. Next time one of these comes up.
Let's not do that to people. How about Sysakev? We touch on Sysakev every month. And before we recorded this, just so everybody knows, Joe was telling me, we never really want to go through each one of these line items, but there is a reason why we show you a slide like this every month. So, Joe, do you want to share with everybody?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, generally the Kev list is super useful. The known exploited vulnerabilities are a list of things that have exploits out in the wild that are currently being used to attack enterprises, right? Like this is stuff that is real and needs to be resolved more or less immediately because there is code that works right now for this stuff. Um, it's kind of hard to go through the list because I could spend half an hour talking about everything on here. But just in general, if you see a product on here that you use or that you may have in your environment, like go update it right now. For this month, we have just a couple of things. If you've been living under a rock, you probably haven't heard about this, but otherwise everybody else has. Like Ivanti and Fortinet have some more code injection vulnerabilities. Um, if you have those, go update them right now, right? Um, and that's just why this list is here. We do have content in BigFix for this stuff. We have a Sysakev content pack. If you want to see where you're vulnerable for all of these items, you need that. Go get it.
Thanks, Joe. And next is the slide I'm most excited about, which is a new release of BigFix. And we've got some highlights here that you selected. I know we're probably going to have a webinar on all of these anyway, but do you want to just touch briefly on what each thing is?
Yeah, quick hit list here. 1102 has a fair few fancy new features. We have removed our dependencies on initd from all of our Linux clients. This has maybe sounds better than it really is. By remove dependencies, we really mean we're removing the initd scripts from the installers. So, for any of you that have install scripts for Linux clients today, if you're still using initd, that will be deprecated starting in 10.02. So you'll have to use these service start commands, service stop commands, rather than initd scripts. So just be aware of that. Hope it doesn't catch anybody out. And we also have some new REST API access for uploaded client files. This one is super exciting to me. Like for years and years and years, I've been a little bit annoyed by our ability to get to files that have been uploaded by clients through Upload Manager. Previously you would have to like give users that want access to, say, an uploaded client log, access to your root server's C drive or E drive, wherever BigFix is installed at. And it's not ideal. No one wants that. Not a good place to be. So now you can give users access to those files through REST API. So fantastic improvement. Super stoked about that one. And then in the SAML space, we now support Entra, or as people from 2 months ago would have called it, Azure authentication in all of our BigFix components. So that's a solid security improvement there for single sign-on. And then we also have BigFix Explorer. This is a scalable way to run API calls against your infrastructure. It essentially allows you to externalize your API calls to some other hardware. So BigFix Explorer is a server component. You can toss it on just another box wherever you want. It doesn't have to, it's not going to be on your root server or anything like that. And fire all the API calls you want at it, and it has its own kind of cache of data, sort of like how Web Reports works today. So it'll allow you to be a lot more efficient with your API calls and not necessarily hit your root server with all of them.
It also has an interface, and the query will be evaluated. So if your query was bad, you will know in advance before submitting it. And it might not seem like a big deal, but I appreciate things like that. So really excited about this. This isn't the, sum total of 1102. It's what Joe picked out to highlight for this call. So I hope you enjoyed that. And let's wrap this up, Joe. I think we're going to be doing this again next month. So if you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. And are you supposed to ring the bell, ding, or are you supposed to smack the I don't know, something
You're
like that.
way more excited about saying like and subscribe than I am. I can't
It's
even
my
get that out.
turn.
It actually hurts me on the inside.
It was just my turn. Anyway, we'll see y'all next month. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everyone.